What happens when a simple party game turns into a public confession that destroys a marriage? How far can a husband's silence go before it becomes the loudest response of all? When I laughed and admitted my secret, I thought it was only a joke. I didn't know it would become evidence. I'm Lyra Hensley, and I ruined my marriage with one sentence spoken between laughter and wine. It happened at our friend's party, during a harmless game of truth or dare that stopped feeling harmless the moment I opened my mouth. The room was warm, filled with music and half-drunken teasing, and when someone dared me to confess something I'd never told my husband, I smiled, trying to sound bold. I said I'd once kissed his best friend, Ryan, years ago, before we were married. I expected gasps, laughter, maybe a few playful shouts. I didn't expect silence. Ryan's smile faltered, Nathan's glass froze midair, and the air turned cold. Someone tried to laugh it off, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. I said it was nothing, just a stupid game. That honesty made relationships stronger. Nathan didn't argue. He just looked at me in a way I'd never seen before, like something in him had finally broken, but not loudly. That night, he didn't sleep beside me. I told myself he was being dramatic, that men always overreact when they can't control the narrative. The next morning, he didn't yell or demand explanations. He just started writing things down. At first, I thought it was a list of errands. Later, I realized he was documenting me. Every quiet moment, every conversation, every message, I was being watched, but not by anger, by order, by patience. I told myself this would pass, that all couples have bad weeks, that Nathan was too calm to ever leave. I didn't know calm was what people become when they've already decided to act. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The morning after the party, the sun felt cruel. It filled every corner of the kitchen, made everything too visible. I sat at the table pretending to scroll through emails, my throat dry, my heart still thudding from the memory of laughter. Nathan moved around me quietly, deliberate as if every motion required thought. He didn't look angry. He looked gone. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to ask why, it was to say he'd be working late. I said I'd make dinner. He nodded once and left. The door clicked behind him, and for a few seconds, I almost convinced myself nothing had changed. Then my phone buzzed. It was from Marcy, one of the guests. "You really went for it last night. Poor Nate," I replied with a laughing emoji, like it was all a joke, but my hand was trembling so much I almost dropped the phone. I told myself it was just gossip, that people always overreact to things they don't understand. The kiss had happened years ago, before we even got engaged. It hadn't meant anything. It was a mistake, a single impulsive moment I'd buried and moved past. But when the game came up last night, I'd felt cornered, everyone daring each other to reveal secrets, to prove they weren't boring. I hadn't planned to say it, but something inside me wanted to watch the shock on their faces. Maybe I wanted to remind Nathan that I wasn't someone he could fully predict. I thought that would make him notice me again. Instead, it made him disappear. By afternoon, the group chat was alive with messages, screenshots of my flushed face, Ryan's awkward laugh, the tense moment that followed before I'd laughed it off. Someone must have recorded it. I felt heat rise to my neck. I typed, "Can we keep that video between us, please?" No one replied. The silence online was worse than any insult. When Nathan came home, he placed his keys in the bowl, hung his jacket, and said nothing. I told him dinner was ready. He sat down, ate slowly, every bite measured. I tried to fill the silence, telling him it was just a stupid game, that Ryan and I barely remembered it even happened. He said, without looking up, "You remembered enough to use it for entertainment." I said he was twisting it. He said, "No, you are." His voice was calm, level, terrifying. I told him we could laugh about it later. He said, later already happened. Then he got up, washed his plate, and left for his office. I poured myself wine and stared at the wall. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger. I'd always been the center of our social circle, the funny one, the one people said brought life to every party. But I hadn't realized how much of that life was built on testing boundaries. Nathan's silence was unbearable, not because it was cruel, but because it was too clean, too precise. When I went upstairs, the office door was shut. I heard faint clicking from inside, keyboard strokes, then a short sound, maybe the printer. I hesitated, hand hovering near the doorknob, then pulled away. I didn't want to look desperate. I told myself he'd cool off. He always did. The next morning, he was already gone. His side of the bed was neatly made, his mug clean, his shoes missing from the hallway. I found a note on the counter that said simply, "Work early." I opened the drawer to get a spoon and saw a small folder resting beneath the cutlery. On it was written, "Household." I opened it. Inside were bills, receipts, and something new, a printed spreadsheet, columns labeled joint account, vehicle, mortgage. I felt a chill but told myself it was normal. Maybe he was reorganizing. At work, the tension followed me. 2 co-workers whispered near the break room, one of them holding her phone at an angle that made my stomach twist. When I walked in, they went quiet. My manager called me into his office later and asked if I was okay. I said yes. Why? He said someone had tagged the company in a social media post about marital drama. My heart stopped. I pulled out my phone. There it was, a clip of my laughing face from the party. The caption read, "She confessed mid-game. You can see his soul leave his body." It had over 10,000 views. I called Marcy immediately. She said she hadn't posted it, but that maybe Ryan's girlfriend had. I said it wasn't funny anymore. She said, "It wasn't funny last night either." I hung up. When Nathan came home that night, I tried to sound calm. I said people online were exaggerating, that it wasn't real. He said, "Reality doesn't need filters." I told him he was being unfair, that one mistake shouldn't erase years of loyalty. He said, "Mistakes usually do when they're confessed publicly." I told him he was being dramatic. He said nothing, just walked into his office and shut the door. The click of the latch echoed through the hallway. The next day, Ryan texted me. "It's getting out of hand. My girlfriend's furious. I think we should just say it was a joke." I replied, "It was." He didn't answer. An hour later, I saw his post online. Truth or Dare got out of control. For the record, I've always respected my friends and their marriages. The comments were brutal. People tagged me, calling me reckless, shameless. I wanted to scream. That evening, when Nathan came home, I told him Ryan had made everything worse. He said, "Ryan didn't need to, you already did." I slammed my hand on the counter and shouted that he was acting like a saint. He looked at me, expressionless, and said, "Saints don't need proof." Then he went to his office again. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, but I kept glancing at the office door. The sound of the printer came again. Soft, steady. I imagined him printing bank statements, emails, maybe even screenshots. The idea made my chest tighten. I knocked lightly and asked if we could talk. He said, "Not right now." I said, "Then when?" He said, "After it's all handled properly." His words felt like ice water. I walked away, shaking. Upstairs, I saw his calendar on the nightstand, the one he used for work. Tomorrow's page had one entry written in neat pen strokes, "Downtown 10:15. I told myself it meant nothing, just a meeting, just work. But deep down, I knew better. Nathan didn't make entries like that for business. He kept his work on his phone, not handwritten. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, pretending not to imagine envelopes, signatures, forms. The following morning, Eli came down sleepy-eyed, asking if Daddy was mad at me. I said no, that grown-ups sometimes fought. He said, "He didn't hug you." I laughed it off and said Daddy was busy. He nodded, unconvinced. Later that day, Mia called. She said Mum had seen the video and asked what was going on. I said people needed to mind their own business. She said Nathan had every right to feel betrayed. I told her she was taking his side. She said, "I'm taking the side that doesn't humiliate someone in public." Then she hung up. When Nathan came home that night, I asked if we could just move past it. He said, "You already did. That's the problem." I told him he was being cruel. He said, "No, I'm being clear." Then he stood, gathered a few papers from his desk, and placed them in his briefcase. I asked where he was going. He said, "Downtown." The word made my chest tighten. "For what?" I asked. He said, "To make things official." I laughed nervously, said he was bluffing. He didn't respond. The front door closed quietly behind him. I stood there for a long time, trying to breathe. The printer light blinked faintly in the dark, a single sheet half fed through. I pulled it out. It was blank except for a header at the top. Case summary. My hand shook. I dropped it, stepped back, staring at the empty page like it could fill itself with everything I had ruined. Upstairs, Eli called for me. His voice was small, uncertain. "Mommy, is Daddy coming back tonight?" I didn't answer. I didn't know how. The days after Nathan's quiet departure began to blur into one long, uneasy silence. I went through the motions, waking Eli up, packing lunches, pretending to work, but every hour felt like walking across thin glass. The video was still spreading. A gossip page had reposted it with the caption, "When honesty kills a marriage." It had hundreds of comments, all dissecting my smile, my tone, the look on Nathan's face in the background. I stopped checking after the first few pages, but the words burned themselves into my head anyway. Home felt heavier now. His absence filled every corner. Even his office, always too neat, felt like it was waiting for him. When Nathan finally came home 3 nights later, it was after dark. He looked rested, clean, and unreadable. I tried to act normal, asking if he'd eaten. He said he had. I asked if we could talk. He said we already had. I just hadn't listened. His calmness made my stomach twist. I told him people were exaggerating online, that we could handle this together. He said quietly, "You made it public. Now it belongs to everyone." I called him heartless. He said, "No, just done." That word, done, sat in my chest like a stone. Later that night, I walked past his office and heard voices through the door. Low, polite conversation. I froze, listening. He was talking to someone, but the tone wasn't angry. It was businesslike. I heard words like documents, confirmation, and timeline. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I wanted to knock, to demand to know who he was speaking to, but I couldn't move. When the call ended, I ran to the kitchen, poured a drink, and told myself he was bluffing. He wouldn't actually file anything. He loved control too much to let go. The next morning, I drove Eli to school. One of the other parents looked at me strangely, then whispered something to another mother. I wanted to scream. I smiled instead, the kind of smile that hurts your jaw. On the way home, I saw Nathan's car parked outside a cafe downtown, the same word from his calendar. I almost stopped, but didn't. I didn't want to see who he was meeting. At work, I could feel the gossip tightening around me. Tyler cornered me in the break room, saying he'd seen the video too, and that I should probably lay low. I told him to mind his business. He said softly, "You're making it everyone's business." His pity made me furious. I snapped that people like him just loved seeing others fall. He shrugged, said, "You gave them the push." Then he walked away. When I got home, Nathan was in the living room sorting papers. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Organizing." I told him it looked like he was preparing a case. He said, "Maybe I am." I tried to laugh, asked if he was planning to sue me. He didn't answer. He just kept stacking the papers neatly into a folder labeled household. I asked where he was going with it. He said, somewhere quiet. I told him he was scaring me. He said, that's not my goal. Then he stood, put on his jacket, and left. That evening, Caroline showed up. She didn't knock, just let herself in. Her face was calm, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She asked if Nathan was home. I said no. She nodded, looked around the house like it belonged to someone else. Finally, she said, I saw the video. I said, everyone has. She said, then you know what you did. I told her it wasn't what it looked like, that people love turning private moments into entertainment. She said, you made it entertainment. That's the difference. I told her to stop judging me. She said, I don't need to. The world already has. Before leaving, she said, he's not angry anymore, Lyra. You should be afraid of what comes after anger. I stood there long after she left, trying to breathe. That night, Nathan came home late again. He kissed Eli goodnight, but didn't come near me. I waited for him to walk into his office so I could follow. When he did, I slipped inside after him. His desk was covered in papers, everything neatly divided, dates, receipts, printouts. I asked what all of it was. He said, proof. I told him proof of what? He said, that silence can be honest too. I told him he was cruel. He said, cruelty is saying things you can't take back. I asked if he planned to leave me. He looked at me for a long moment and said, you already made sure I did. Then he closed the folder, turned off the lamp and said, I'll handle it properly. That was the first time I realized I didn't know my husband at all. The next day, I took Eli to the playground to escape the house. He drew in the sand, humming softly. Another parent walked by and gave me that same look, half curiosity, half pity. I heard her whisper to someone, that's her. I turned away, pretending not to hear, but Eli tugged on my sleeve. Mommy, he said, is Daddy sad because of you? My throat closed. I forced a smile and said, no, sweetheart, grown-ups just argue sometimes. He nodded slowly, his eyes too knowing for his age. When we got home, Nathan was packing a small bag. My pulse spiked. I asked if he was leaving. He said, not yet. I said, then where are you going? He said, to make things clear. I laughed weakly, asked what that meant. He said, you'll understand soon. I tried to stop him, reaching for his arm. He pulled away gently, no anger, no struggle. Don't make this harder, he said. Then he picked up his bag and left again. That night, I went through every drawer in his office. Most were empty except for one locked compartment. I found the key taped under the desk. Inside was a neat stack of papers, screenshots of my messages, comments from the video, timestamps, even copies of group chat conversations. He had organized everything, labeled by date and topic. One folder said public incident, another said financial review. At the bottom of the drawer was a single yellow sticky note that said, Tuesday, 10:15, final. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. When he came home, I confronted him. I told him spying was disgusting, that no one deserved to be treated like a suspect. He said, you stopped being a suspect when you confessed. This is just record keeping. I shouted that he was ruining our lives. He said, no, I'm protecting what's left of mine. I told him he was heartless. He said, no, I'm careful. Then he walked upstairs and shut the door. The next day, my sister called again. She said, he's talking to someone downtown. I told her she didn't know what she was talking about. She said, he's calm, Lyra. That means it's already done. I hung up on her. That evening, Nathan's mother came by again. This time, she didn't stay long. She handed me Eli's overnight bag and said he'd be staying with her for a few days. I asked why. She said, he needs quiet. I told her she couldn't take my son without asking. She said, you made enough noise for all of us. Then she left. I sat on the floor for hours after they were gone, surrounded by toys that suddenly felt like evidence of something I'd lost without realizing it. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the faint buzz of Nathan's phone on the table. A new message flashed on the screen before I could stop myself from reading it. Your paperwork is ready for signature. When he came home later, he didn't look at me. He just gathered the folder, slipped it into his briefcase and said, I'll be out early tomorrow. I said, Where? He said, Downtown. I told him not to go. He said, You don't get to tell me that anymore. Then he walked out. I didn't sleep that night. The printer in his office started again at some point, steady and calm, as if even the machine understood its role in my undoing. I went to the door, hand trembling on the handle, but I couldn't open it. I didn't want to see what the pages said. The next morning, when I went downstairs, the office door was open. The desk was empty except for one folder. I opened it. Inside was a printed form, petition for dissolution of marriage. It wasn't signed yet, but the line for my name was there, blank and waiting. I sank into the chair and stared at it until the sunlight shifted across the room. I thought about all the small moments that had led here, the jokes, the pride, the games I thought made me interesting. I thought about Nathan's silence, the way he never fought, never begged, just prepared. And I realized that quiet people don't forgive, they calculate. When I heard the sound of the front door opening, I looked up. Nathan stood there in his suit, briefcase in hand. He didn't look triumphant or angry, just finished. It's time, he said simply. I asked what time. He said, for things to be official. I wanted to say something, to beg, to scream, but the words stuck. He turned toward the door again, adding, Don't wait for me tonight. As he left, the morning light caught the papers on the desk, the ink glinting faintly. My eyes followed him through the window as he walked to his car, calm and certain, the man I used to think I could always outtalk. I stood there, barefoot, watching him drive away, realizing that silence isn't the absence of love. It's what comes after it dies. The house felt empty after he left that morning. I walked through each room like a stranger, touching the furniture, the cold marble of the counter, the hollow space where his laptop used to sit. Everything was still, yet heavy, as if the walls themselves had overheard the quiet end of something sacred. Eli's toys were stacked neatly in the corner. His laughter used to fill this space, but now it felt wrong, like sound couldn't belong here anymore. I told myself Nathan was bluffing, that maybe he'd gone downtown to clear his head, to scare me a little, to make me realize what I'd done. But hours passed, and he didn't call. When I tried his number, it rang once and went straight to voicemail. I left a message pretending to sound calm, told him I'd made dinner, that we could talk when he got home. My voice cracked halfway through, and I hung up before I started crying. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought it was him. But when I opened the door, it was Mia. She looked tired, her arms crossed, her face pale. She said, "You need to stop pretending this isn't happening." I told her she didn't know what she was talking about. She sighed, sat at the table, and said, "I talked to Nathan." My heart dropped. "Why would you do that?" I asked. She said, "Because he called me. He wanted to make sure you weren't alone when he left." I tried to laugh. "Left? He just went to work." She shook her head slowly. "He said he's filing, Lyra." The word hit me harder than I expected. Filing, like it was paperwork, not a life. I told her he was bluffing. She said, "He isn't. He's calm. That's how you know." Then she added softly, "He told me he still wishes you'd respected him enough to keep it private." I wanted to yell, to tell her she was taking his side, but I couldn't. The truth was, there was no side left to take. When she left, she hugged me, but it wasn't comforting. It felt like goodbye. That night, I stayed awake, pacing. The clock ticked louder than usual. Every noise made me flinch, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floor. I kept expecting the sound of his car in the driveway, the click of his key in the door, but it never came. Around midnight, I finally went into his office again. The drawers were empty now. Even the printer tray was clear. The only thing left was a single piece of paper face down on the desk. I picked it up, and my stomach dropped. It was a receipt, time-stamped for that morning. County Clerk's Office. Filing fee, petition for dissolution of marriage. My hands trembled so violently that the page slipped to the floor. For a long time, I just stared at it. My mind kept replaying every choice I'd made that led here, but I couldn't stop twisting them into justifications. I told myself he should have forgiven me. It was one kiss, one stupid confession. Everyone made mistakes. Why couldn't he see I was just trying to be honest? But then I remembered his words. You made it public. And maybe that was what broke him, not the kiss itself, but that I'd turned his trust into entertainment. The next morning, the doorbell rang again. I froze. When I opened it, a man in a dark jacket asked my name, confirmed it, then handed me an envelope. My voice barely worked when I asked what it was. He said, "Service of documents," then walked away. My hand shook as I tore it open. Inside was a stack of papers, thick and cold as judgment, petition for divorce, temporary possession orders, request for spousal support review. My name stared back at me from every page, printed beside words I could barely comprehend. There was no anger in the language, no cruelty, just clean, quiet precision. Attached was a notice, effective immediately, property division under review, financial accounts frozen pending agreement. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I sank into the chair, staring at the paper until the words blurred. Nathan had really done it. The man who'd barely raised his voice in 10 years had dismantled our life with perfect control. I called him twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail. I sent a message. "Please, can we talk? This isn't us." Minutes passed, then the phone vibrated once. A text from him. "It's exactly us. Just finally in writing." I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I just sat there, gripping the papers, my hands crumpling the edges. Through the window, I saw movement outside, a car idling by the curb. The passenger door opened, and Eli stepped out, holding his backpack. Behind him was Caroline. She didn't come to the door right away. She waited, watching me through the glass. When I opened it, Eli ran to me and hugged my legs. I bent down, holding him so tightly he squeaked. Caroline stood there, composed as always, her eyes soft but distant. She said quietly, "He asked me to bring him home to get his things." I felt my throat tighten. "His things?" She nodded. "He's staying with Nathan for now." I shook my head, said this was ridiculous, that she couldn't just take my son like that. She said, "It's in the papers, Lyra." I turned, flipping through the documents until I found the line, temporary physical custody. Father. The words burned through me. I looked up at her and said, "He can't do this." She said, "He can," and he did. I wanted to fight, to argue, but the strength drained out of me. I sank into the chair again while Eli went upstairs to pack. Caroline stood by the door, polite, composed. Before she left, she said, "You can still be a good mother, but you have to stop pretending you're the victim." Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking down the driveway. The house felt too big after they were gone, too clean. I picked up the papers again, reading them over and over as if the words might rearrange themselves into mercy. But all I saw was order, dates, signatures, stamped approval. No anger, no betrayal, just completion. Later that evening, I drove downtown, needing to see him, to talk, to fix it somehow. The courthouse plaza was busy, sunlight bouncing off the glass doors. And there he was, Nathan, standing by the steps, dressed in his navy suit, talking to a clerk. He looked calm, steady, like he'd finally exhaled. When he saw me, he didn't look surprised. He just watched as I walked closer. I said his name softly. He didn't answer. I held up the envelope, asked if this was really what he wanted. He said quietly, "It's what you chose when you confessed to the world instead of to me." I said it was just a game. He said, "So was our marriage to you." I felt my eyes burn. I told him I never meant to hurt him. He said, "I believe that, but meaning doesn't erase what's done." I asked if we could start over. He shook his head slowly. "You can start over, Lyra. I already did." A gust of wind blew through the plaza, lifting one of the pages from my hand. I chased it instinctively, catching it just before it hit the fountain. When I looked up, he was walking away. I wanted to call after him, but my voice wouldn't come. People nearby had started to whisper, their eyes flicking between the papers and me. I felt exposed again, just like at the party, except this time there was no laughter, only pity. I pressed the papers to my chest and turned toward the courthouse doors, my reflection staring back in the glass. My lipstick was smudged, my hair tangled, my face pale. I barely recognized myself. A flash went off somewhere nearby. A phone camera, a stranger documenting the moment. I turned, blinking against the light. Someone murmured, "Isn't that the woman from the video?" I wanted to shout that they didn't know me, that they didn't know the story, but what would I even say? They'd seen enough already. When I looked back toward the steps, Nathan was gone. The only trace of him was the calm echo of his footsteps fading into the noise of the city. I stood there for a long time, the papers shaking in my hands, until a security guard approached and asked if I was all right. I nodded, even though my throat ached. He pointed to the door, said quietly, "They're closing soon." I walked back to my car, the envelope clutched against me, my reflection in the window faint and fractured. Inside, everything smelled like him. The faint cologne, the quiet cleanliness, the order. I started the engine and stared at the papers again. The final page had his signature. Beneath it, a single line read, "Effective immediately." For the first time in years, I didn't have words. All the explanations, the defenses, the pride, they evaporated. There was only silence, thick and absolute. As I sat there, watching people pass, I realized Nathan had been right all along. Some things don't end with shouting or drama. They end with a pen stroke, a timestamp, and a silence that feels like justice. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.